mentioned 10, 12,000 euros. Is it the price now for? It's not per person.
Well,
It's per person.
during the Belarus crisis, which was a repeat of the Evros situation, I think that was what the Belarusian authorities were charging these people. They would ask them to pay this price with a guarantee of access to the European Union through the Belarusian territory. Uh, Smuggling is a big business, is an industry. In this country, in Greece, recently I was told that more than 20% of the prison population in this country, the inmates are connected to some sort of the smuggling activity. So it's a
Exactly.
big business.
Okay.
It's a big business.
As wars are raging at Europe's doorstep, migration flows remain a constant preoccupation. Today, we sit down for a conversation with one of the European Union's most influential voices on migration and asylum policy, Mr. Margaritis Schinas, Vice President of the European Commission. With a career that spans 3 decades, from the corridors of Brussels to the front line of EU crisis response, Mr. Skinas has not only witnessed but also shaped Europe's migration policies. In this discussion, we'll review the EU's responses to migration challenges, from the Balkan wars to the Syrian displacement, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the ongoing fallout of the Russia's war on Ukraine, as well as what the new pact on migration and asylum means for the future. As we shall see, Southeastern Europe, which sits at the crossroad of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, has been at the forefront of these challenges. Mr. Skinas, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Skinas, you have had a front row seat to Europe's political evolution over the past few decades. Looking back, what first sparked your interest in European affairs, and how did the question of migration come to occupy such a central place in your book?
Well, I was 17 when I was about to enter university, the law school in my hometown in Thessaloniki. That, that moment coincided with the moment of Greece's accession to the then European communities, but rather with a ceremony at the Zapion that triggered the process of accession. So it was a solemn moment, and it was a moment that I felt as a generational call, if you like. I understood that it was the duty of my generation to be the first one to work for Greece within the European Union. I did not belong to the generation that ambitioned Greece's accession. I do not belong to the generation that made accession possible, but I'm the first generation of Greeks who served European Greece from Brussels. And I think that was what sparked my commitment to build an academic career that would guide me towards Brussels. On migration, this came sequentially because when I was during the Juncker Commission, the chief spokesman of the Commission, that was the moment of the explosion of migratory flows with the collapse of first Libya and then Syria, with the mass movements of desperate people towards Europe, crisis after crisis. And this was something that I had to manage as Commission spokesman on a daily basis. And that made me very much involved in all the efforts that the European Commission developed to cope with the migratory phenomenon. And who would have told me during the 5 years of the Ursula I Commission, I was the vice president in charge, so I had to uh, firsthand deal with shaping the European response. So this is a bit the parametrical background of what brings me in front of you to discuss these issues today.
So the key turning points were Greece's accession to the European Union, I mean the European Community in 1981, which made you think that you are the European calling? And then what happened in the Juncker Commission? The end of the Cold War, the Balkan Wars, did not really impact your work and the migration dimension in your work.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke about what sparked my interest in Europe, but then, of course, I joined Europe as a young civil servant, as a young European civil servant, few weeks after the fall of the Berlin Wall in '89. And that was a moment of European renaissance, rebirth. It was the last Delors Commission who were putting the final touches in the single market for '92. And we also had to vertebrate the new emerging continent through trans-European networks. Then came the moment of the Balkan Wars and the way this felt into the European Union institutions. At the time, I was working on energy and transport in the private offices of commissioners. So, yes, in a way, my civil service career in the commission followed and to a certain extent was shaped by these important external shocks that all had a common trait that although they shook Europe, threatened its cohesion, at the end of the day, or rather at the end of the process, made Europe stronger uh, because Europe did manage to provide adequate responses to these challenges.
And so, given your career at the Commission during this critical period, as you say rightly, the how did you consider the the gradual formation of Europe's policy on migration until before the Syrian war started? I mean, I refer to the various Dublin regulations, and how do you think they were adapted to southeastern Europe? That is mostly Greece, but then also Cyprus, and to some extent Italy, which became a big gateway during those decades. How do you reflect on the work of the Commission and the Council until before the Syrian war?
Let us be very frank and let us not mince our words about that period. There was simply no EU policy for migration and asylum. During that period, Europe had to work on migration through a patchwork of regulatory solutions. Most of them international conventions, some of them, very few European legal texts, but there was no proper EU regular policy on migration and asylum. That was the root of the problem. We had to, for many years, for many decades, been trying to create such a response, to create such a framework, even before the Syrian event. I still remember Antonio Vitorino, who was one of the early fathers of these efforts. The pattern was always similar: crisis, effort to produce a European response, failure to find agreement. There was no common ground, neither in the Council nor in the European Parliament, for that. And if I take your question a step further, even after the Syrian war, when again the flames reached the continent, uh, every effort that the Juncker Commission did to produce European agreements on migration failed spectacularly because member states would not agree and because the European Parliament would not commit because the member states would not agree. So we were left with a sequence of policy failures for many, many years.
So the member states could not agree. How, from your position, what could you see what was the problem? among the member states? What was the position of France, Germany, and a frontline country like Greece?
Now, there again, I think the answer is pretty obvious and rather simple. Uh, we had the fundamental toxicity element in this debate because the member states at the first line of entry, Greece, Malta, Italy, Spain, um, they felt that they were left alone in coping with pressure that was put on them because of geography. And they were trying to convince the others to share this burden. At the same time, the countries of reception were also feeling that they were assuming a disproportionate burden of a responsibility to provide for the people that were reaching them without any sort of controls. So, if you ask me of the root causes, this was the root causes that we had failed by the time that an agreement was finally produced very recently. Europe had failed to find a common ground. For years, for decades, our member states were repeating the red lines instead of producing a common landing zone on which we could build the European migration policy.
You were not yet vice president of the Commission in 2015, 2016, but you were very much involved in European Commission affairs. How did you feel, even personally, when the migration crisis erupted I remember the peak moment was around September 2015. It was really now it was impossible to miss it, but it had started earlier. How did you feel at that moment?
Without any doubt, I think 2015 was probably the most difficult year in my professional career because on that during that year a perfect storm engulfed me. We had at the same time the ongoing drama at the time of the Greek debt negotiation, and as you rightly point out, the migratory explosion, especially September, October 2015. Then I have very vivid memories on this migration crisis because there was not a single day that I could produce any positive narrative or news on migration. Every day was a problem. Um, we felt it as a collective failure, as I was saying earlier. Everything that happened in the Greek islands, in Moria, I still not forget that some of the perpetrators of the Paris terrorist attacks, Bataclan, transited through the Greek islands at the time. It was awful. It was a sequence of bad news. So this galvanized the belief that a European solution was necessary, but despite the efforts by the Juncker Commission, this did not materialize. The only, if you like, positive positives of that period was that during Luxembourg presidency we agreed to a certain system of quotas by qualified majority that would help Greece and Italy to relocate a number of Syrian refugees. But that was also proven traumatic. Yes. Because it helped, of course, to alleviate some of the pressures on Greece and Italy, but at the same time created lots of traumas elsewhere. Because qualified majority is always a problem. So if you ask me of how I felt that time, the answer is pretty miserable. It was very difficult, very tough, and being on the front line of the commission as a chief commission spokesman was particularly complicated.
And so you felt, I suppose, another calling to address this issue, and perhaps this is how you ended up with a migration portfolio in 2019, or it's not
Well,
related?
then during the Juncker period, I think the regulatory solution, the regulatory agreement did not come, but uh, we were collecting piece and pieces of this puzzle that would be necessary in the next institutional cycle. And it was a big surprise to me to become vice president of the European Commission as Greece's member of the college, and also to be given the responsibility for coordinating migration policy. I think Ursula at the time made a rather wise choice to appoint a vice president who is from the first line of reception country and from the center right, with a Home Affairs Commissioner who is from a reception country, from Sweden, from the socialist family. So she crafted a team that would rally lots of political and knowledge capital around the issue. I think this helped enormously. And what also helped us to start building this solution was that by December 2019, when we started, Moria was simply untenable. There were 20,000 people in this makeshift camp in Lesbos that was supposed to host only 3,000. Lampedusa was an open wood. We had huge migratory pressure on Canary Islands, Ceuta. So we had pressure on all routes. This was the situation that we found upon arrival, plus the traumatic experience of the wounds of 2014-15 that have not been healed. So the starting point of the commission, the Ursula One Commission, was dramatic, but probably that was also a blessing in disguise because the starting point being so low, it allowed us to go fast.
You could only improve. Yes, you had a rough start, huh? Because not only the situation was, as you said, in December 2019, but in February 2020, there was a series of crises involving the triangle Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus, and you were very reactive to that. So it was just before COVID. Mm. What happened? What happened at that
Yeah.
moment?
This was a historic first. It was something that had never happened before in Europe, and that was also, in my view, the consequence, or rather, the cost of non Europe. The fact that Europe lacked a migration policy made it very easy to autocratic regimes, despotic leaders around us to instrumentalize migration, or rather to weaponize migration to hurt Europe. This, the first time that we saw that was in Evros in February 2020, when about 20, 25,000 desperate Syrian refugees were put in buses in Istanbul, and they were guided to the Greek-Turkish border with a premise that, borders are open and tomorrow you will be in Munich or in Stuttgart or in Vienna. That was a hybrid attack. It was not a migratory phenomenon. It was a hybrid attack. It was a coordinated, well-resourced, well-timed attack. Happened on a Saturday, Sunday of a long weekend of Land Monday in Greece, and clearly that was a test case for Europe because we had the obligation to respond to this hybrid attack and show that nobody can intimidate or harass Europe. And the fact that we did not have a policy did not mean that we were defenseless. So we very quickly mobilized a considerable number of Frontex forces. In an unprecedented move, the presidents of the three EU institutions arrived on the ground together with a Croatian prime minister who was the president of the council at the time, and we were there on the front line of defense, if you like, to symbolize this. It was a Rubicon moment, I think. Evros was a Rubicon moment that showed the determination of Europe during the first underlying commission to do things differently.
So, until which level of the Turkish political hierarchy you think it went? That is, you mentioned a hybrid attack. You think it came from the very top, or it was something more bureaucratically arranged for Turkish police forces trying to cope with the situation? Or do you think it came really from the top?
I think it was an impulsive decision made by the so-called deep state in Turkey,
Okay.
which brings together military, political, and the intelligence components. And this followed the dramatic loss, I think, of 15 Turkish soldiers in Syria. And somehow the deep state in Turkey considered that they were losing soldiers in Syria because somehow Europe was asking them to do the dirty job. So they thought that the adequate answer would be to bus 25,000 refugees. Be it as it may, I think it was the wrong move. It produced the opposite results of those that were intended. And although we saw this on another occasion in the Belarus Polish Lithuanian border a year later, still in both cases, Europe proved much more resilient and able to defend itself than the perpetrators of this hybrid attack would think.
So you would consider it more as kind of reactive action by top officials in the Turkish police or in the military, rather than a broader geopolitical strategy of, let's name it, President Erdogan and his very high-ranking ministers?
Well, I don't know. Actually, I was not involved. I don't know how this decision was made on the Turkish side, but clearly the sequence of events, the killing of these Turkish soldiers in Syria, I think on Friday, and the organized attack in the border less than a day later, clearly point out to an impulsive sort of now you will see move, which probably was not geopolitical, but it had major geopolitical consequences.
I thought there was a clear place for the drama, which was the Evros River, and with confrontation with the Greek police there. But I was talking recently with the Cypriot Minister of the Interior at the time, was Mr. Norris, and he was explaining to me how interestingly exactly the same was taking place in Cyprus at the same time, February 2020. And the difference was that there was no Cypriot police there to stop the flow because of the green line in Cyprus. And so, what do you think, that there was also a coordinated attack, as you say, both towards Greece and towards Cyprus?
No, I do not think that the situation that we had to face in Cyprus, which I also was asked to manage together with the Cypriot authorities, was the same. We didn't have, in the case of Cyprus, a well organized attack by the deep Turkish state targeting Cyprus, but I think we had, in the case of Cyprus, a chain of interests that would bring together smugglers, would bring together so-called universities in northern Cyprus, and some people on the northern part of the island where the republic does not exercise effective control,
Mhm.
that thought of that as an opportunity to make money.
Mm.
And I think that the raison d'etre for this situation was, as you said, the particularity of the Green Line, because the Green Line technically is not the external border of the European Union, cannot be a border. It's due to the constitutional realities and Cyprus's accession to the European Union. You cannot have police in the Green Line. So that was an opportunity for some people to exploit the weakness, the institutional, legal, and political weakness of the Green Line phenomenon to make money at the expense, of course, of these poor people that were supposedly brought to Northern Cyprus to become students or whatever. And then they were made to believe that they could cross freely into the European Union. It was a very difficult situation there as well, but also a situation in which Europe was able to help Cyprus effectively.
So you think it was perhaps less political than in Greece? It was more the smugglers trying to take advantage, perhaps, of a big pool of Syrian asylum seekers in Turkey and use the Green Line to send them toward the EU and as a result collect some fees for the passage.
Yes, I think the Evros case was clearly a deliberately organized hybrid attack. And the case of the Green Line was an organized network bringing together different kind of interests, smuggling, commercial, political, so-called university that worked for a time, uh, but we were able to stop it. Now you would know that there are probably no zero rivals from the Green Line because we helped the Cypriot government to do some moves that proved very effective. First, I personally talked to the Turkish airlines
Yes.
that were flying these people
Mhm.
via Istanbul
Yes.
to the occupied part of Cyprus, and I very clearly told the airlines that they have a responsibility, that these are not tourist travelers, but they are people that would use the Green Line to transit illegally into the European Union. So I asked the airlines to reinforce controls, papers, passport checks, visas, and I think this proved very important. Then the so-called universities in the right part of Cyprus were clearly told to be less generous on invitations, not only to alleged students but also family members of the alleged students. So we worked on the supply side, if you like, and we were able to reduce this phenomenon. And on the demand side, also we helped with our member states, we helped Cyprus to be able to return many of the illegal arrivals to their countries of origin. And it's with a certain pride that I can say that Cyprus is now the undisputed European champion of returns. It has been returning one of the biggest number of illegal arrivals. So it was the similar policy area, but a different pattern.
So Cyprus received European funding to return migrants, and you also suggest that uh, you were able to influence actors in Turkey at Istanbul airport and perhaps also in the northern occupied part of the island, some so-called universities who were bringing students, but actually these were people just trying to migrate toward the EU. So how do you see the prospects and I mean the cooperation and the prospects for cooperation in this triangle, Turkey, Greece, Cyprus? Is it uh, I mean on one extreme we would see there is no cooperation, there is no trust here, And on the other extreme, you suggest that cooperation is possible between those among the three countries on migration flows.
On a general note, there will be no European migration policy without uh, enhanced cooperation with countries of origin and transit. It's as simple as that. We will never be able to manage internally unless we're able to manage externally. So the so-called external dimension of migration policy is a fundamental pillar of what we're trying to do. And I must say also that in the last 5 years, we have solidified this external dimension. We now have agreements with all major countries of origin and transit, from Bangladesh to Pakistan, Turkey, Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt. We have Western Africa. We have reinforced cooperation because clearly we need to help these third countries to help us. So Turkey, in this context, is an important element. It's an important actor. Turkey is not in itself a country of origin, but is a major country of transit because it has borders with many countries that are crucial to the migratory routes on its eastern part. So, my belief is that Turkey should be helped by the European Union to reinforce border controls on the eastern border, because that would be good for Turkey and good for us, for the European Union, Greece, and Cyprus. The more effective these controls are on the eastern part, on the eastern border of Turkey, the more effective Euro Turkish relationship would become. And we're spending an important considerable amount of money in supporting Turkey, not only in helping the refugee communities that are on its ground, on its territory, but also to reinforce the equipment for border management at the east. So, no, I do not belong to a school of thought that would say that we don't need Turkey on migration. We do need Turkey on migration, and we need it to engage. We need it as as an interlocutor, if not a partner.
You suggest the situation has improved in terms of the capacity of the European Union and its member state to manage migration flows at the external border, in part with cooperation with transit and origin countries. What what are your thoughts about the future? Do you think now it's a strong arrangement?
The thoughts about it, sorry?
What are your thoughts about the future? Do you think the current arrangement is solid, or do you think that there is still a need for more sustainable policy?
I'm rather hopeful and optimistic for the future for a number of reasons. First of all, since December 24, Europe has finally arrived at a big European consensus on migration. We now have a policy, we have a regulatory framework, which is a holistic one. It's called the EU Pact for Migration and Asylum. It was backed by the majority in the European Parliament and by the Council member states. After decades of trial and error, Europe now has a migration policy, which will enter into force the 1st of January 26, which is a European system with border management, with responsibility, partnerships with countries of origin and transit, uniform procedures across the European Union, and solidarity and burden sharing. So it's a holistic regulatory solution that connects everything to everything else. It's a holistic and cohesive uh, policy framework rooted in EU law, anchored in EU law, and financed by EU resources. We recently got 2 billion euros extra funding for migration in Europe. So this is the first time that Europe is not sleepwalking on migration. We're not try and see what happens. So we now have a policy, have a framework, and this is already producing results. We have a general improvement on all routes of the migratory flows. We have uh, the smugglers clearly targeted because they cannot go through our cracks now. The smugglers know that we have a policy, and it's very difficult to have people pay them $10,000, $12,000 to come to Europe when they know that Europe has finally organized the system that only would allow the asylum seekers to go through and would return the illegal. So I'm optimistic because this framework provides for all the answers we have been looking for decades. Will it be implemented properly? I think yes, it will, because there is a common interest by all member states to use this system to obtain what they need. The first line member states to obtain immediate solidarity in all types of situations, and the reception countries to obtain more predictability and planning instead of being inundated by people who come and go without any control system. So, yes, I'm optimistic about the future.
You mentioned 10, 12,000 euros. Is it the price now for? It's not per person.
Well,
It's per person.
during the Belarus crisis, which was a repeat of the Evros situation, I think that was what the Belarusian authorities were charging these people. They would ask them to pay this price with a guarantee of access to the European Union through the Belarusian territory. Uh, Smuggling is a big business, is an industry. In this country, in Greece, recently I was told that more than 20% of the prison population in this country, the inmates are connected to some sort of the smuggling activity. So it's a big business.
Okay.
It's a big business, and we have to break the business model of this.
Do you think some of the people who pass get kind of loan from the smugglers? Because I'm wondering how many can pay this price in the sense that they don't pay immediately, but then they are indebted to the smugglers and they pay back. How can they afford such a high cost?
I think there is a known industry developing with certain codes that we are not fully aware of. In many cases, especially in Africa, there are crowdfunding efforts, I'm told, so
Okay.
that those who make it can somehow
afford. Yeah.
subsidize those who finance their trip. Another phenomenon which is also worrying in illegal migration routes is that we have found out that in many cases, especially from Africa, those who try to enter illegally in the European Union are not necessarily those who are in need, but also many from the middle classes that they want better lives in Europe. So it's a very multi-dimensional phenomenon that needs to be tackled.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, so probably it's interesting there are remittances made by those who make it back to the community, which allows to fund further departure.
All sorts of these formulas have been tested. There is also, how should I put it, an idea of life accomplishment for many people that in certain parts of the world, going through migratory route and making it into the European Union is some sort of a life achievement that becomes a model to be imitated. In my many trips to the countries of origin and transit, I travel basically everywhere. Uh, One of my key messages to the people. I try to, through media, to address myself to public opinion. I would always say that don't embark on these journeys because they will not be as promising as you think they would be. And don't put your lives in the hands of the smugglers. We have legal pathways that are possible and open, and pursue all these legal pathways. Do not embark on these journeys.
I see. And I have two more questions before concluding. Uh, One is that with my conversations on the Cypriot side, I still have the feeling that there are some problem that are pending, but is they didn't like the arrangement in the new framework, which is to give 20,000 euros to countries to accommodate asylum seekers. That they would have preferred not to receive that money and be able to transfer them to other EU countries. Do you think there are possible solutions to these standing issues, or it was really the limits of the agreement that was possible among the various member states?
2 points on that. The first one is that Cyprus voted in favor of the EU pact, so I'm very grateful to Cyprus, as I am to Greece, by the way, for solidly backing our proposals. The second one is that this clause of sort of a quantitative payment is not something that was part of the Commission proposal. We did not propose this. This was something that surfaced in the Council as part of the overall compromise, and it's something that I hope that we will not use everywhere because probably it won't be necessary because the whole idea of the pact, the way it is designed, is that whoever pushes the solidarity button, whoever calls for solidarity and activates the solidarity mix provided by the pact will get it. So there will not be need to invent things. The idea would be that everyone who needs will get what it needs.
And the last question before concluding is: do you think that geopolitical instability at the periphery of Europe could again challenge the situation? We know that the periphery of Europe is unstable. There is an ongoing war in Gaza. The situation is also tense around Iran. The war in Ukraine is not over. Uh, how do you think possible geopolitical upheavals could again challenge the status quo?
Look,
And the role of Europe in this?
we do not live in a sterilized world. We do not produce policy in laboratory conditions. And the European Union stands at the crossroads of geopolitics. Everything affects us. Everything that happens at our periphery affects us, and a lot is happening in our borders. So we have to be permanently aware, permanently alert. We have to follow world affairs very diligently, and we need to be able to act to prevent and deter rather than react. Um, then again, I think that despite the turbulence around us, we're not hit by new waves of uncontrolled migration, contrary to some analysis and expectations. For example, the Middle East conflict was very much contained in terms of migratory movements. We did not detect mass exodus of displaced people to Europe. Some earlier fears that the Taliban regime in Afghanistan will also lead to mass movements did not materialize either. Of course, we have the ongoing war in Ukraine, and we have this special temporary protection status that allows for many European refugees to legally come to the European Union. I think this is a system that worked well. It helped us as it helped them. But the overall picture, I think, is that we are living in a more controlled environment. I personally think that Africa would remain an issue in the years to come, especially with the situation in Western Africa not being totally stabilized. I think we have to pay particular attention to the Western African countries, Senegal and Sahel. Try as much as we can to stabilize them, to help them with partnership agreements. But overall, I I think that there is need for geopolitical alertness, yes, but I don't sense any imminent risk as we talk.
Mhm. Okay, so thank you very much for answering my question, Mr. Skias. So, what is next for you now? What are your current projects in the field of European and migration affairs?
I am in a period where I have to stay very connected to public life. I have treasured a lot of experiences, I think, and knowledge that I am depositing as I'm doing it now with you. I will contribute to these debates as a former member of the commission, but also as a citizen. And I think this is a particularly privileged position to be in because one can speak with the knowledge of what has experienced, but without the constraints
Mhm.
that were inherent to this previous function. And I'm looking forward to this new period.
So yeah, I would like to thank you very much for being ready to speak like that so easily. It's a great honor to talk with you, and I am very grateful for your willingness to take part in this kind of studies. So thank you very much for your insights to this research, which are extremely helpful. And and again, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.